This is a second video essay. I've done one before on AI, and this is a new one, and it is on a thorough critique of meaning in life. I'll explain more what that means in a minute, but I want to introduce who is here with me. This is Arjun Arora. He is a student of mine at the University of Toronto, a stellar student. He has greatly impressed me. We have been working for quite some time now on a video essay on this, and then we are going to proceed to, write a paper. I've done a couple presentations, one in Cambridge, one at Oxford on this. You build up and you iterate and you refine and you reflect and you wait, come back and trying to build up this argument. Obviously, we're going to seek publication. There'll be a follow-up video essay where we try and present a more positive proposal. This is going to be mostly a critique. But I think many of you will find this very relevant. Uh, uh, Many of you are interested in my work precisely around this issue of meaning, not in the semantic sense, but what makes a life meaningful, what makes it life worth living, even when we are faced by the frustrations and the failures and our faults, etc. But first, I want to introduce Arjun and let him say hello, introduce himself, and tell you a little bit about how he got involved in this project. And then we'll start the video essay. And what that's going to involve is I will present an argument that we have been working on together, but I want Arjun here to show co-authorship. And also at the end, depending on how much time he has left available to him, we'll probably get into a bit of dialogue, questions, connections, concerns about the arguments. So first of all, Arjun, welcome.
Thank you for the generous introduction, John. My name is Arjun. As John has said, I'm a student in the University of Toronto studying physics and cognitive science. This project is something that has been of great importance to me as a human being, not only as an academic. Coming into the university, I was, like many people, I think my age, lost about how I should live my life. I was a nihilist to some degree. I dealt with depression, and there weren't many institutions or sources to which I could turn to understand how I should and could live my life. So it was born, this project, out of a personal desire to understand meaning in life from my end, and also to converge with John's works and his ideas on how we should live life. This was something that I was pursuing independently, and he as well. And we decided that this would be a good opportunity to join what we're doing together to build something more.
Thank you. Excellent introduction. So what we're going to be doing is critiquing the standard model. It's a pretty standard model in psychology right now. And this is a model that is very close to the folk theory of meaning in life. What's the folk theory? That's the largely implicit, maybe never focally focused on or discussed in any great detail, but it's the implicit theory we carry around about what makes a life meaningful in our culture. We have implicit theories about what minds are and what bodies are and what persons are. And wrapped up with those, as we'll see, is an implicit theory about what meaning in life is. Now, right off the bat, we're using a metaphor here. When we say meaning, we don't mean how a sentence has meanings. We mean something analogous to how a sentence has meaning. As we'll see, there are other convergent terms people use to try and talk about this: sense of belonging, sense of connectedness. Some people talk about a sense of purpose. We're going to wrestle with all of that in this essay. But for most of this research, where we're sitting at now, I think this is the consensus. There are four features that make up meaning in life. There is purpose. I'm not happy with that, so here's the first moment of critique. Purpose is a confusing term. It can mean that you're trying to get to a particular goal, like Arjun's purpose is to get through his degree at university. That's a specific goal state he wants to get to. If you have meaning in life as a particular goal state, you face this really weird problem that if you never reach it, does that mean your life was meaningless? And if you achieve it and now your goal is done, does your life now become meaningless? And then people will say, well, I don't mean that kind of purpose. And that's my point. So I suggest a deeper term, um, which is orientation, which comes up a lot. Arjun, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about how purpose does seem to be something that is offered in place of meaning in life, especially to people my age.
Yeah.
We talk about purpose in academia. Oh, just graduate from academia, graduate from your degree, and then find a job or go to grad school. And then eventually, just by jumping from obstacle to obstacle and climbing over them, you'll somehow find success and meaning in your life at the end. You found yourself maybe in a professorship, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you found meaning in life. And I think you're exactly right that this is one of the most damaging, confounding statements we can make regarding meaning in life.
Thanks, Arjun. So I'll come back to what I mean by orientation, and we'll see other people using it. We're going to be talking about this book, Meaning in Life by Thaddeus Metz. He invokes orientation. Dan Chiappi and I have been doing a lot of work on the connections between orientation and the grounding of rationality. So that's all going to come. So the next is coherence. This one's a little bit harder to give you a clear example, but it's something like you find that there's no absurdity to your existence. Things sort of fit together, they belong together, and they make sense to you. So, some of you familiar with my work, you know this is already invoking, without discussing it, issues around relevance realization and selective attention, and reconstructive memory and things like that. Um, Now, the notion of coherence is already problematic, not only because it doesn't clarify its relationship to these cognitive issues, even though it's using a term that's frequently a cognitive term like coherence. Um, it's also problematic because the empirical work on coherence has been inconsistent. Heinzelman done some of the original work. I got to meet her. She's a good person. So there's no accusations of fraud or anything like ridiculous like that. That's not happening here. But some of her research has failed to replicate more than once. Um, and we think there's a potential confound in this notion of coherence between, are we talking about a product, a finished thing that's somehow there, or a process that we engage in? And if you're not clear between those two and the meaning in life construct, meaning the theory that we're proposing, that's being proposed, I should say, by the folk culture and by academic psychology, if you're not clear about that, that you would get inconsistent results depending on how, if people think you're talking about something sort of intrinsically there or a process they're going for. Is it a found coherence in a piece of paper, or is it an insight you happen to have about a picture you're looking at? So that's some of the issues there. The next is significance. Significance is very poorly described and explained. It's something like it's not ephemeral, it's not superficial. Um, to our mind, what our minds, I should say, we don't share our mind. To our minds, this is probably pointing towards something like that whatever it is that's giving you meaning is real. It's not superficial, temporary, ephemeral, ambiguous, but it's clearly intelligible and has a real presence in the world and in your life. And then the next is mattering. And this is the sense, it's usually described as the sense of being connected to something larger than yourself. This is the metaphor that people use, and that takes us to this seminal book, which we'll reflect on later, Meaning in Life and Why It Matters by Susan Wolf. And Metz also responds to this book. Um, the issue there is whether or not, obviously, this isn't to be taken literally. Wolf argues that nobody thinks your life becomes more meaningful if you're chained to a mountain or something like that. And then we have to get at, what does this mean to be, right, to be connected to something bigger than yourself? One of the things we're suggesting is, if you look cross culturally, the metaphors that are associated with this are things like waking up or enlightenment, a light turning on. And you can think about what's being conveyed by that phenomenological change. So when you're in a dream, you're in a small world you think is real, and then you move to a larger world from which you can see the biases and limitations and illusions of the smaller world. Same thing, you're in a dark room, you're banging around, you're bumbling, you're falling. You turn the light on, and now you're in a larger framing that shows you how you were mistaken, how you had illusions. So we think mattering, and this will make sense. Mattering is about being connected to something that is uh, more real. This makes sense, by the way, because there is some emerging research that significance and mattering are two sides of the same phenomena. And so, if significance is connoting something like realness and mattering is about being connected to realness, they would fit very, very nicely together. So, that's part of the proposal. Now, all that being said, um, I'm still going to argue, and Arjun has been helping me do this, that that feature list, those four features, even with one connection between significance and mattering, is we're going to find that is very inadequate as a theoretical construct. Okay, let's start sort of trying to unpack some of the presuppositions that are, shared assumptions that have gone into this psychological work. So one is the work all begins, and here's a bit of self-critique on my part. I just accepted this for a long time. The work, this academic work, begins with a distinction between meaning of life and meaning in life. Uh, Meaning of life is a metaphysical proposal. It sometimes invokes the supernatural, which Metz, for example, takes a long time to very carefully consider and says, is supernaturalism the best way of understanding meaning in life? But uh, everybody in this field is is committed to some version of naturalism, at least that we are considering. So we understand what they're trying to do with their distinction. They're trying to say we need a naturalistic account. We don't want the supernaturalistic associations with meaning of life. So we're going to talk about meaning in life, being imminent to our lives, not transcendent. That is well taken. However, there's a bit of a baby with the bathwater because it stands to reason that meaning in life could be significantly impacted by variation in one's meaning of life. What do I mean by that? Let's give you an example. Suppose somebody has a rather implicit, although we know that this is a very broadly folk theory shared by people. Somebody has an implicit theory called the just world hypothesis, that the world is primarily just. That's part of their worldview. It's part of what would typically fall under meaning of life. That's the way reality is organized, and they have to comport themselves accordingly. Now, that can be impacted by what's known as moral injury, and there's growing work that that's what's at the heart of PTSD, that you have a just world view and something happens that shatters that, and you go into crisis. And what happens is, even if it's not full PTSD, there's a crisis of meaning for you. There's a deep crisis of meaning. So while we do want to preserve the distinction, we shouldn't just ignore meaning of life. It's quite possible, especially because we're often relying on self-report from people. Given my example, it's quite possible that people are actually mixing these things up implicitly and unconsciously when they're answering questions. Okay, so all right, they're causally entangled, meaning in life and meaning of life. But what are we supposed to do about that? We're not going to establish the supernatural. Right, we've already agreed on that. But what we can do is we can be responsible. How? We can make sure that the meaning in life construct reaches out for theoretical integration with the psychology of worldviews. How do they work? And how is a person's worldview making an impact on their meaning in life? Okay, now that's important because once we move to worldview, we are into something that Christopher Mastropietro and I have been talking about for quite some time, making use of Clifford Geertz's work. Clifford Geertz talked about a meta-meaning system. So independent of legal meaning and etiquette meaning and aesthetic meaning and ethical meaning, your culture has to give you a worldview. Also, we refer to it as worldview attunement, in which it models you, the kind of agent you can be in that world. So it models you to the world and it models the world to you. So you go into a certain room and you are modeled into, right, the accused, and there's a person up there that is modeled as a judge, and you are in a courtroom, and there's an agent arena relationship there, right? So, what worldviews do is they give you sort of the most overarching, this is why it's called meta meaning, agent arena relationship. They give you the most fundamental grammar for your cognition, individual and shared, about how agency and the nature of the arena and how they fit together, this is really important, is to be done. They give you a kind of fundamental grammar for that, largely implicitly. But of course, you know when it's wrong. You know when people are showing up as the wrong agent in an arena. For example, I mean, here's a ludicrous example. Somebody runs onto a football field wearing a tennis uniform and carrying a tennis racket. You go, what's going on? This doesn't make any sense. Okay. So now that brings up something really important. When you think about the agent arena relationship, that they're co defining, co creating, co determining, we're bringing out something really important. We're bringing out that meaning is a real relationship between the agent and the arena. Now, this goes back to Plato, excellent work done by a great philosopher, William Desmond, on what Plato called the metaxu, the betweenness, right? And that we have that the world and us as cognitive agents, we are co-participating. So this is, and we'll come back to this, but this is the idea of an affordance. So this is graspable by me. The graspability is not in the can. There are many creatures that cannot grasp it. The graspability is not in my hand. I can't grasp the moon, right? It's about a real relation of a co-fittedness. Both my hand and the can participate in a shape together, and that affords us entering into a particular kind of mutually affecting causal relationship. That's what I mean by affordance. And this is not a bizarre notion. The notion of biological adaptivity, that an organism is adapted to fit its environment, this is Darwin's language, is exactly this notion. Adaptivity is not in the organism or in the environment, but how they properly fit together. So this brings out a rather important possibility, a hypothetical, a hypothesis, that why meaning in life is so important to us is it may have something to do with this fundamental affordance of adaptivity. We're going to have to refine that, but we could talk about something that isn't really talked about in this literature, which is what is the function of meaning in life? We get lots of evidence that meaning in life, is prevents depression, and meaning in life is ameliorates this, and meaning in life affords. But what is its actual function, and how is that function? Can we understand that function cognitively and biologically? So you see why this matters. This is very important. Now, as soon as we get things like affordance and adaptivity and fittedness, that should trigger something else in our awareness that isn't properly addressed by the psychological literature. Although I want to give uh, Arjun can back me up on this. We didn't read this book until the last year or so. He definitely has provenance, not giving him credit, but we have come to all these. I've been doing this work a long time, and Arjun and I came to this before we looked at this book. So actually, there's quite a bit of independent convergence, which raises the plausibility of the proposal. But what Metz and we both want to point you to is that meaning is what is known as a thick term. Okay. So there are some terms that are mostly merely descriptive, like red. That box over there is red. Okay. Many terms that are important to us and that matter to us, and notice all the language I'm using, are thick terms. They're not only descriptive, they're normative. They prescribe behavior and they praise behavior. So if I say of Arjun, which I've done many times, he's very rational. I'm not just describing him the way when I say he's quite tall. He is, by the way, or he has a beautiful. Well, that's normative. He has a very deep voice. Okay, maybe that's not normative. But notice when I say he's rational, right? I'm not just describing him. I'm praising him. I'm recommending that you try to see things the way he does. You try to indwell him, take his perspective. I'm recommending that you try to internalize, you try to learn from him and model yourself so you get some of his skills and his perspectives so that you indwell him and internalize him. If we put those two together, indwelling, internalizing, I'm recommending that you let Arjun inspire you in an important way. There's an inspirational aspect to this. When I say someone's life is meaningful, I'm doing the same thing. I'm not just describing it, I'm praising it, I'm prescribing it, I'm recommending it. I'm recommending that you be inspired by it. We watch movies and read novels about meaningful lives or meaningless lives so that we can indwell and internalize in this inspirational fashion. Because meaning is normative, it is something that demands how we ought to behave. It tells us what we should be doing to some significant degree, like rational. And I'm going to rely on that comparison a lot because it turns out that these two things, being rational and being meaningful, are quite interwoven with each other. All right. Now, the thing to know about this normativity means there's a goodness to it that is praiseworthy and prescriptive. That's normativity. Thing to notice about this normativity, and Wolf does a lot to make this clear, Metz does as well, and others, is it's not merely moral normativity. It's not merely doing the ethically right thing. You can be a quite ethical person and have significant meaning in life. Perhaps you're very homesick, very lonely. That could really reduce your meaning in life, even though you're being a morally upstanding person. Okay? Meaning in life and subjective well being aren't the same normativity. People do seek out subjective well being. They seek, as Arjun said, they seek success for which they can be content. Yeah, good life. And they do that and they mean, I've succeeded, right? Subjective well being matters. We're not denying that. Uh, and people do feel it is prescriptive. They are taught by their culture that you should seek success, and there's something wrong with you if you don't. Okay, so it's normative. But the thing is, again, all these thinkers and researchers argue meaning in life isn't right the same normativity as subjective well-being. Why? Because, and here's the classic example, there are situations where they pull apart from each other. When you have a child as a parent, many measures of subjective well-being, how successful you are going down. Your health is going down, your sleep is going down, your finance is going down, your relationship with your significant other everything is going down big time. Done it twice. Um, but if you ask people, why are you doing it? Because it's so costly to subjective well-being, they'll say because it's meaningful to have a child. It's meaningful to have a child. Okay, so there's a normativity here, but the two temptations that our culture sometimes slides towards is, oh, well, you mean moral normativity? No, I don't. Oh, you mean success normativity? No, I don't. I don't mean subjective well-being. I don't mean morality. So the question now emerges, what is the nature of this normativity? What is the nature of the normativity? And we're going to come back to that. I want to start with a proposal that will start us towards answering that question and some of the problems we've already raised, while also helping us disclose further problems. The proposal is the normativity in meaning in life has something to do, as I've already argued, with being connected to reality, and that this is importantly normative for us. And in some ways, this is deeper than the normativity of morality or success because they depend on being connected to reality. So, this is why many people do have an intuition that there's something deep about meaning in life that isn't captured by morality and success. And it's one plausible proposal, which we're giving right now, is because connectedness to reality is the normativity and meaning in life. And you need that both for ethical normativity and for success normativity. Okay. What kind of connection? Like gravity? Obviously not. It's going to be a cognitive biological connection because it's going to have to do with affordance and adaptivity. And it's going to have a function, and the function is going to integrate and afford your agency. And as we're going to further argue, your selfhood and your personhood. And these are all ways in which you are in the world. And of course, it's not just going to afford them haphazardly, it's going to curate and coordinate that in some comprehensive fashion. Now, that means already, some of you might be saying, that sounds a little bit like, what the ancients used to talk when they're talking about character. And yeah, and that's partially what we're alluding to. I would say a better way of getting at that point, which we're going to come back to, is that there's deep connections between the cultivation of meaning and the cultivation of wisdom. So we're going to come back to that. One thing that people seem to associate with meaning in life that isn't explicitly foregrounded by the feature list we gave you, although it has a deep heritage, especially in the philosophical tradition, is that meaning in life is associated with a kind of reduction of cognitive dissonance. You're not beset by feelings of existential guilt. Remember, we're not talking about moral guilt or success guilt, existential guilt. Like when you're like, am I being who I should be? That kind of question. You don't want that deep kind of cognitive dissonance around that. You don't want to be in deep conflict with yourself. So, although I'm not totally happy with this phrase, I'm going to use it as a placeholder as long as you give it a lot more resonance. Part of what meaning in life is associated with, and I don't mean a sense of contentment, because that's over here with subjective well being, is I mean it much like more like what the ancients used to call ataraxia. The best translation is something like peace of mind, but it means like it's not just you're not in conflict and you're sort of content. It means that you feel there's a deep integrity, a functional integration to what you are that is deeply affording of your agency, your selfhood, and your personhood. So that's one side. And then something we've already seen before in the talk so far is that meaning in life seems to be being about connected to what's real. Now, what's interesting in the literature is you get very famous seminal thinkers like Plato arguing that those two things are the core things. And why? Core to meaning. He wouldn't say meaning, he would talk about something like eudaimonia or the good life. But what is that? Now, Plato worries a lot about virtue. We'll come back to that. And of course, he also worries quite a bit about success, by the way. But there's this other thing he's talking about. Um, and he is bringing out the idea that we have two meta desires. What's a meta desire? Meta desire is a desire you have for all of your other specific desires. So I desire some water right now, or I may desire to shift my position. Okay. A meta desire is a desire you have for all of your desires. Doesn't mean the desire is just like one state. It can vary in its intensity, but that's what we're talking about. And what we're talking about here is that you want whatever to satisfy your desires to be real. Now, that's becoming problematic in our culture, and that's having an impact, by the way, on people's meaning in life in a way that a lot of people are starting to notice and talk about, and we're starting to get some empirical evidence about it. When we get into social media and we get radically disconnected from reality, meaning in life measures start to fluctuate, or at least things that are predicted if meaning in life is declining start to show up. So, you want whatever is satisfying your desire to be real. You don't want it to be an illusion. You don't want it to be a fraud. You don't want it to be deception. I've done this many times with students in my class. How many of you are in really satisfying romantic relationships? How many would want to know if your partner was cheating on you, even if it meant the destruction of the relationship? Almost everybody puts up their hand. When I ask them why, they'll say, because it's not real. It needs to be real. If you found out that your parents had their whole life didn't really love you, but were pretending, they were rehearsing scripts about what to say and how to act, and they want to keep their jobs as an actor, they want to keep saying those things and doing those things, are you okay with that? Or do you want them to really love you? Okay, so you see the point. Okay. And Robert Nozick did a lot around this with the experience machine and things like that. And Plato does a lot about that too. Okay, so we want it to be real, but we want also whatever is satisfying our desires to not fragment us, to not disintegrate us. And of course, such a trope. It's cliche. The person that satisfies one of their desires, but he's at war with himself, right, and torn apart, or she's fragmented, and oh, right, and this is gaining the world but losing your soul. The proverb, right? And so, again, the point is we want these two, and we don't just want them haphazardly. We want, and this was Plato's argument, we want something in which they are reciprocally affording each other so that this connectedness that's at the core of meaning in life is being deepened, enhanced. It's going deeper and better into us, and it's going deeper and better into the world. I often use a Latin term to describe this because I want to bring out some associations that I hope will make you a little bit uncomfortable, because that is the intent. The word for connectedness in Latin is religio, means to bind together. But you're probably hearing something like religion in there. Okay, hang on to that concern with me provoking you that way. Maybe some of you aren't. Some of you are saying, that doesn't bother me. I think religion and meaning in life should be deeply associated. The point is, the meaning in life construct needs to talk about this relationship, and we're going to come back to it. I'll point you to a book I'll be talking about later. Arjun and I are both reading it. Appeal and Attitude. Well, Arjun's not reading it yet, but he's going to be reading it. Appeal and Attitude: Prospects for Ultimate Meaning by Stephen G. Smith. This ultimate meaning, what is going on there? What is that? And that sounds religious, but is it necessarily what we mean by standard religion? Why are so many people today spiritual but not religious? Why aren't they just content with everyday meaning? Why do they want a more ultimate kind of meaning? Okay, so let's keep going. Do you see there's a gathering momentum here? I hope you feel it. All right. So we have meta desires, and we're trying to solve them in a way that ultimately works at the meta meaning level. Remember the level of how ultimately do agent and arena fit together? And then part of the argument I've been alluding to is we're trying to solve some of our meta problems of adaptation. What do you mean by that? Well, adaptivity is the ability to solve problems, and our adaptivity is intelligence. We have general intelligence. We can solve a wide variety of problems in a wide variety of domains, a wide variety of ways that all strongly mutually support each other. And this is why the race is on for artificial general intelligence, because intelligence is so powerful that way. But the thing is, and I'm not going to do this argument here, I have done it so many places, and Arjun has heard it many times himself. Um, there's two key meta problems we're trying to solve for our adaptivity. Anticipation, we're trying to anticipate the world. This is handled well by a predictive processing framework. And we're trying to zero in on the relevant information and ignore all the vast amounts of irrelevant information, combinatorially explosive. And we have to ignore most of that information. We have to find some information obvious so that we are oriented and we know what to do. So we've got these two interlocking. They do interlock. I can't give you that argument right now, but there's lots online about this, lots in publication. They interlock the anticipation, predictive processing, relevance realization. So these are meta problems. Notice what's happening here. We're talking about something that's addressing our core ability to connect to the world, which is solving meta problems. We're dealing with meta meaning, and we're dealing with the satisfaction of meta desires. This is how it can be something quite profound for us, even if many of us perhaps are not thinking about it or reflecting on it or wanting to think about it or reflecting about it. The point that it might have a significant functional, causal, cognitive, biological, ontological, having to do with the structure of reality, depth to it, is nevertheless a plausible case. So, for example, one of the things that relevance realization gives you is an optimal grip that, right, and it gives you a way of taking a stance, setting yourself up for a sequence of optimal grips so you can make yourself way through the world. And this brings us back again to orientation. Relevance, when you look out into the world and you're casting a perspective and participating in an identity, a particular agency, perhaps also a particular form of self, perhaps a particular form of personhood. But as you're doing that, you are orienting towards reality, and orienting is fundamental. If you're not oriented, you can't reason. Kant discovered this way back when, and a lot of people are talking about this. Dan and I are trying to get a paper published on, it's in revision right now, about orientation and rationality. You can't be rational, you can't make your way through the world, etc., etc. You can see why this is really important. Now, notice that we use language of disorientation to talk about meaninglessness. I'm drifting. I don't know which way to go. I don't know where I am right now. Okay? So, orientation really matters in an important way. So, once you start talking about relevance realization, there's the possibility that meaning in life can be affected by the ways in which relevance realization can complexify, how it can recursively feed back on itself and correct itself. What are you talking about, John? Relevance realization is self-corrective. You do it when you have an aha moment, when you go, "Oh, I thought she was angry, but she's afraid," and you have an insight, and everything, what's like, your whole perspective changes. What's foregrounded and backgrounded, what's salient, meaning stands out for you or doesn't, shifts, and what role you take shifts. You have an insight. Okay, relevance realization is recursive on itself. So another argument, it's an awakening from the meaning crisis, both the series and the book. There's the shameless promotion of the book. There it is. And there's a book actually written about the meaning crisis by somebody, about my work and Chris's work on the meaning crisis, by Andrew Sweeney. Thank you, Andrew. Um, there's a paper that's also in revision, gone through 2 rounds, getting very close to getting published, where we propose that there's a cognitive continuum, that you start with a well-established phenomena in psychology called fluency. And then when that spikes, you get an insight. We think I can't argue it right now, but fluency has to do with something like relevance realization, getting an optimal grip, right? Okay. When you get a cascade of insights, you get a flow state. Now, stop right there. You know what that flow state is like? You know, that state where I'm in the zone, I'm at one, right? All that chatter in my head is gone and everything is bright. And I feel like I'm discovering something deep about the world. And it's like the world and I are fitted together. Notice this language. And we're at one with each other. And, and this is flow. And this is Csikszentmihalyi's work. And this is optimal experience. You're right? Optimal performance. Why would it be optimal experience and optimal performance? Probably because you're optimally gripping the world. And what's going on there, right, is that people who have the right kind, but so let me stop. I'll say it a different way. You want quantity and quality of flow because those are predictive of how well people judge how meaningful their lives are. You want a lot of flow in your life. The more you flow, the more you're likely to say, I have a meaningful life. But you want the right quality of flow. You don't want flow in video games to which you're addicted that are disrupting everything else in your life. So you want this to happen in a way that transfers broadly to many different domains of your life and transforms you, helps you get better at flowing in many different domains. And of course, um, some of you might be saying, you know, some religions try to do that. Yeah, Taoism, Zen, that's what they're trying to do in some important way. Now, if you start to flow at the level of how you are doing sort of your fundamental orientation at the agent arena level, you may get a whole you may have not have just an insight here or a flow here. You may have a whole system of insights, a comprehensive flow state. You may have a mystical experience. And we've already done work in my lab. We've presented it at several academic conferences, and there was COVID and there was other stuff, and and then the people drifted away. We've never got it published. But turns out more meaning in life results if you have more mystical experiences. Again, cultures have said this, but nobody bothered to test for that. Think about that. Why? Why is it? That seems like obvious. And it looks like it's the sort of insight aspect of the mystical experience that's doing most of that work. Again, are we looking for found coherence or are we looking to find and cultivate coherence, like insight, flow, mystical experience? And of course, some people have mystical experiences in which they report the following. Many people, cross culturally. This is Yaden's work and Newbird's work and a whole bunch of other people's work. They have an experience, a higher state of consciousness in which they say, I experienced the really real, the really real. And it was so beautiful. I was so at one. And what they do is they transform many of them transform their lives in ways that are objectively better. They change careers, they change relationships, they start to change the structure of their identity. They want to be in contact, listen to the language, they want to be in connection with the really real, not because it's doing anything for them. It's good for its own sake. It's not, we're already out of the domain of moral goodness because we're in meaning. It's not about success. It's not leading to any kind of success. It generates. They come into conformity and it ripples out with success, and that gives us objective measures. But that's not why they're doing it. Okay. It's good. It's good because it's really real. Remember the meta desire? We want to be connected to something that's really real that is integrating us and bringing so it goes deep into us and we go deep into it. We can indwell it deeply and internalize it deeply. It inspires us profoundly to change who we are. This is Rilke's great line from his poem, you must change your life. Okay, so what's going on there? Coined a term for this, sorry, it's technical, called onto, having to do with being, normativity. It's a kind of goodness that isn't about moral goodness or aesthetic goodness or success or power. It's about I'm deeply realizing what is deeply real. And I want to keep doing that. Okay? Meaning in life needs to be able to talk about this cognitive continuum. It needs to talk about the impact of insight, flow, mystical experience, higher states of consciousness on meaning in life. The current construct is not set up well to do that. Now, part of the problem, we argue, and this is very similar to arguments that I've made with Leo Ferraro and others about mindfulness or wisdom, is psychology is using a feature list. It's using a feature list. There's these four things, deet, 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 feature list, and they describe a product. When you have these, listen to my language. When you have these, you have meaning in life. It's a feature list and it's a product theory. Okay, what's the problem with that? First of all, feature lists, I made this criticism multiple times in multiple publications. Feature lists, this is something our folk theory thinks is what holds our understanding, but what the scientific work shows doesn't hold our understanding, or at least doesn't sufficiently hold our understanding. So, for example, tried and true example. Ask people, what's a bird? Feathers, wings, a beak, and it flies. So I'm going to pile some feathers here, put in a beak, gather them all together, throw them in the air. Do I have a bird? No, I don't have a bird. And what's missing, is a structural functional organization. How do the pieces fit together and belong together, the features, so that the bird fits together and belongs in fits to and belongs together in its environment. That's what's missing. The religio is missing in an important way. What you want is you want a feature schema that says, how do the features hang together? How do they belong together such that they enable the organism to belong to the world, such that its behavior makes sense to it and to us? Now, that means when we're talking about a process instead of a product and a feature schema instead of a feature list, we're now talking about something that's inherently developmental in nature. Now, put these two together. Meaning in life has a normative dimension to it. You should. You should. It should inspire you. And it's a process. It's a process. When you put normativity and processes together, what you're basically getting is a developmental dimension. We're talking about an aspect of meaning in life that is connected with maturation. Maturation. This is why you make judgments about people's meaning in life projects as being too childish. All he wants to do, like the guy's 35 and all he wants to do is play with cars. He might have larger cars, but we make these kind of criticisms because we've got at least an understanding implicitly that there's a developmental maturational aspect, and that makes sense. John Rusin has argued very well that what's at the core of maturation is facing up. Listen to this language; it's so perfect. Facing up to reality. You face it. When you face something, you're oriented towards it, and it can challenge you. It can call to you. You face me. You mean yes, you know that? I'm doing that. And facing up means, oh, there's a normative dimension to that because up is good. Up is good in some important way. Um, so meaning in life has a maturational, developmental aspect to it. Now, that means that in addition to, we should be worrying about, or concerned about, I should say, the inspirational aspects of meaning in life, this means there's an aspirational aspect of meaning in life. Now, here's again how meaning in life is like rationality. Rationality is inspirational. How do I become rational? I indwell people that I judge to be more rational than I. I imitate them and internalize them until my metacognition develops and I can do for myself what they could do for themselves. That's inspirational. I'm inspired by them. Rationality is also aspirational. This is my relationship between my current self and my future self. Part of what it means to be rational is I aspire to be more rational than I am. I have a responsibility to my future self to try and make my future self have a better life. So I aspire. This is Agnes Callard's work on aspiration and how it's central to rationality. Meaning in life, it's again, why do you think these parallels keep coming up, by the way? Meaning in life keeps, right, coming up also as inspirational and rational. Well, why? Because if it's developmental, if it's normative, if it's inspirational and it's normative, that means we have to worry about making mistakes, being self deceived, doing it wrong. We have to try and get better. So it has an aspect, an important aspect of rationality to it. One of the things that concerns us is there's no concern in meaning in life around asking people to what degree they've checked to see if their meaning in life project is rational, or is it the result of self-deception or misinformation from other people or you illusion. All right. So notice what we're talking about here. We're talking about inner peace, deeper connection to reality. It's got an evaluation dimension into it, in it. That brings in rationality because evaluating well, that's part of what it is to be rational. Another meaning is, right, normative in the sense of developmental, maturational, aspirational. That's also a kind of rationality. Bringing all this together, inner peace, connection to reality, these two dimensions of rationality. We're talking about wisdom. We're talking about deep connections between wisdom and meaning in life. The current meaning in life construct is not theoretically connected with the cultivation of wisdom in any important way. That makes it deeply anomalous and therefore suspicious because across cultures, historically and spatially, geographically, the cultivation of meaning and the cultivation of wisdom have always been deeply interwoven and understood that that's like a necessary case. Part of what is going on, we are arguing, is a kind of modal confusion. Eric Fromm famously argued we have two existential modes, and notice why this merely psychological isn't enough here. And he's a psychologist, so it's important to say that. Existential mode, by the way, is an agent arena configuration that tells you how you should be going ahead. One is the having mode. This is where we meet our needs by having things, by controlling them. I need to have liquid. There you go. Control and consume. Categorical. There's a can of sparkling water. But I have other needs that he calls the being needs. This is being mode. These are needs that are met by developing. I need to become honest. I need to become courageous. I need to become more mature. And notice that these aren't about controlling the world. They're about entering into right relationship with it, right connectedness, right religio. They're inherently bound up with meaning in life. But if you confuse these, you get very deeply frustrated. So if you try to pursue satisfying a being need, I need to be in love. So I'm going to have lots of sex. I need to be mature. So I'm going to have lots of cars. You won't actually be satisfying the developmental needs. You'll be frustrating them. You'll be very foolish, very self deceived. Now, so let's put this together. We have a theory, and we're going to see how it exacerbates what I'm going to say now, but we have a theory, the folk theory, scientific, that tends to think of meaning as a product that one possesses personally. Doesn't have any normative aspect to it, is not bound up with the cultivation of wisdom, with the cultivation of virtue and virtuosity. This is this is our point. This is going to be conducive to a modal confusion about meaning, a profound modal confusion. That's costly. That's costly. in a lot of ways. And why that matters is if you're confused, and let's say there's, oh, I don't know, a massive worldwide pandemic, and you're cut off from your busy routine and you're thrown back onto your more fundamental ways of connecting to the world. I'm obviously alluding to COVID. You can go through some very serious struggle. Many people fell into despair. Meaning in life should help you to deal with those things that tend to bring about despair, a sense of alienation. Everybody felt alienated, a sense of absurdity. This doesn't make any sense. A sense of anxiety. Like, is it all just going to collapse? Is it all meaningless? My world isn't working? Modal confusion. If we just sort of have shelter and physiological health, that's all we need, right? Anguish, heartbreak. I haven't seen my mother in 3 years, or like sorry, not 3 years, in 3 months. That kind of anguish. So the way of talking about this is called existential, note existential, we're in existential modes, existential resilience. How much does your meaning in life, how deep is it, and notice deep to deep, how deep is it such that it makes you resilient in the face of significant trauma to your world? Such, right? And that trauma doesn't have to be like like it was in COVID. It could be. It could also be more caused more reflectively, more in the philosophical sense of existential. You may think, why am I doing all of this? It's like what I'm doing doesn't make any sense to me. And notice now again, maybe this is part of what's going on with coherence. Maybe coherence isn't about just things fitting together. Maybe coherence is a resistance to absurdity, something more pronounced and profound. We need an idea of meaning in life that tells us how it connects to and how it can afford, through wisdom and virtue and virtuosity, existential resilience. Rationality was also central. Many of you probably noticed that a lot of your friends, maybe even you, went kind of crazy during COVID. And having practiced rationality ahead of time would have been helpful. Would have been helpful. Okay. So meaning isn't in here. It's not within you. It's not a personal, private, preferential possession. My meaning. Talking about my meaning ultimately doesn't make any sense. Go back to the original metaphor. Imagine if I treated word meaning as if it was my private, personal possession. Giggle frop noop noop blah, blah, giggle frop noop die. That didn't mean anything. Why? Because we're not sharing it. And if meaning is normative, I have to be responsible to people challenging me to correct it. In fact, a lot of philosophers, going all the way back to Kant, most recently Brandom, there's a normative component even to semantic meaning. I like you can no 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 that's not what that word means, and we correct each other on it. Where's the authority for that? It's how we are trying to maintain connectedness to ourselves, to our ancestors, and to our children. Meaning is between. It is not within. It is not within. It is between. Well, I can have me things can I can have these feelings and they're meaningful to me. If you don't have notice what we talked about earlier, you have a relationship to your future self. What do you do to make sure those feelings are relevant to your future self who may not be having those feelings. Could you really survive on a feeling? How do you make that feeling connect to your future self? How do you make it shareable to other people to make sure you're not going kind of crazy with your meaning or being radically immature in your meaning? This is another thing we're criticizing. There's a presupposition of an individualistic framework, even though meaning plausibly connects to worldview, and worldviews are cultural in nature. Look, I have to be able to indwell you and internalize you in order to be meaningful and right, in order also to be rational. We've already talked about this. In addition to it having to be communicative, it has to be communal. We have to have a shareable sensed presence of this. We love it when we have a shareable sensed presence of this. We love it when the Blue Jays are playing the Dodgers and it looks like they're going to win and we're all sharing this and nothing's really happening. Like, how did your life actually impact? What, right? Maybe if you're a Blue Jay, you get less money. But for us, no, we want to commune. We want to communicate and commune. One of the worst things that can happen to a human being is playing golf all by themselves and getting a hole in one and nobody's around. Okay. So we need sensed presence and we need communication and correction. That's why one of the most powerful ways to punish a person is to put them in solitary confinement. Okay. So we've got these two things. We've got relevance, what we find relevant and real, or if you like, true. Because true doesn't necessarily just mean semantically true. You have to be true to somebody, a true friend. Right? Your aim has to be true. Okay, so I'm using it much more broadly like that, and there's a reason I'm doing that. Right? Relevance constrains what truths we consider. We don't pursue all possible truths. They're combinatorially explosive. I bet none of you are concerned about whether or not the number of paper clips in your bedroom correlates with the number of squirrels you might see that day. The number of such truths is overwhelming. And you'll say to me, notice, right? That's not important. Import, take it in. It's not relevant. Okay. But it's not just one way. Yes, we use relevance to constrain truth, but we use truth to correct relevance. Tom, she's not angry. She's afraid. Look, pay attention. You're right. Relevance constrains truth, and truth causally corrects what we deem relevant. They're bound together. So, meaning is deeply interwoven with trust. We have to be able to trust each other. Now, we trust each other by sharing meaning. And the more deeply the meaning is we share, the more we trust each other. The more we trust each other, the more we can indwell and internalize, inspire each other, and act as models of aspiration for each other. So trust and right meaning are like this. They interweave. But meaning also has to do with belonging. This is the psychology of belonging. This is the work of Kelly Allen and others. We need to belong. We need to, and this is her language, we need to fit in. Notice the language. And if we don't belong, we suffer loneliness and alienation, and we're physically and financially and emotionally probably in trouble. That's what her research shows. So meaning and belonging go together, and meaning and trust go together, and meaning and a kind of truth go together. Again, not just conceptual truth, but there's a Greek word, aletheia, how things disclose to us how we can realize things, moments of realization. And it's interesting that we've got, trust and belonging and truth all connected, right? There's an ancient word that's the etymological origin of truth and trust and also gives belonging. It's the word troth. We don't use it anymore, but it shows up in things like betrothal. I'm betrothed to this person, right? There's this deep, deep connectedness there. So this is part of what's going on in 4E Cog Sci. Cognition isn't in your head, it's between you and the world. It's meaning, sense making, making sense of our sense making is co-created by us and the world. We already saw that with the agent arena mattering. Relevance realization, however, is very egocentric. It's about how things are relevant to me. Then I have to learn, if I want to communicate and commune, how to be relevant to others. And what's interesting is I start to face what Rosa calls resonance, and I can also get this relationship with the world. Resonance is when you turn a corner and there's a beautiful sunset, and you just stop and behold it. You just stop and behold it. You're reciprocally opening with it. You're just trying to let it go deeper into you, and you're trying to go deeper into it. And it requires that there's a certain degree of uncontrollability to it. If you can completely control it, you won't be in resonance with it. This is like flow. Flow needs an environment that puts a demand on you, and you have to stretch your skills to meet it. We need resonance. This is Hartmut Rosa's argument, or our lives start to seem meaningless to us. But that connects up with everything we're talking about. But sometimes the resonance, that reciprocal opening can turn into reverence. We can get so deep, we can flow so deeply and be so at one that we can touch what's ontonormative, the really real. And we more than behold, we behold. And that has an impact on meaning in life. We need a theoretical construct that can meet up with all of this work, a growing body of work, cognitive science, neuroscience, psychology, around mystical experience, around resonance, around flow. We need meaning in life construct that can connect us well theoretically with this whole continuum. The problem with the meaning in life construct is it's propositionally fixated. It's fixated on propositions. It's fixated on our beliefs. What do we believe? Ask people what they believe. What do you believe? What do you believe? Is most of your connectedness carried by your beliefs? No, 4E Cog Sci says that most of your connectedness is carried by your skills, your procedural knowing, carried by your states of consciousness that make you present in the world. It's your perspectival knowing, and it's carried by your participatory knowing, your agency and your selfhood and your personhood, and whether or not you belong. That carries what's known as existential feelings. This is the work by Radcliffe. I don't like the word feelings, but he argues at length that unlike what we normally mean by feelings, he's talking about something that is, and this is his language, world directed. It's connecting us to the world. He talks about experiences of derealization, depersonalization. He's a psychiatrist or philosopher of psychiatry. People have the Capgras syndrome, where they think all of their loved ones have been replaced by identical robots. Or they have Cotard syndrome. They'll say, "This isn't my arm. Will you please amputate it? This isn't my arm." So sensed presence of connectedness that's non-propositional in nature. These people know they have all the propositions about their arm. They have all the propositions about their beloved people. That they still have most of their skill, but the sensed presence and the connectedness are gone. And then their sense of reality, their sense of being in a real world is really challenged. Now, there's also the opposite of that, where that sensed presence of connectedness is better than the norm. And that's when people talk about the really real in states of at-one-ment. The current construct really can't deal with any of these points because it doesn't ask about the state of the world. It doesn't ask about worldview. It doesn't ask about the state of fittedness. Now that's really odd because we're going through a trust apocalypse, as Kieran McCammon argues. Trust in all of our institutions at all-time historical low. We're going through a loneliness epidemic, and loneliness is as bad on you as smoking. Lack of belonging, lack of connectedness. But interestingly, we should predict that using the psychological measure of meaning life, we should go out and find that meaning in life is going down or poor. But in some of the studies done by the psychologists, meaning in life is above medium. Everybody's lives are quite meaningful. But if you were to ask those people, do you think the world's really ordered and beautiful? Let me ask you, do you think the world is really ordered and beautiful? Do you really trust? Are you really connected and communing with it? Does it really inspire you and afford aspiration? Or are you trying to cocoon yourself from it as much as you possibly can? You're not communing, you're cocooning. But can we really cocoon? Look at COVID. We can't really. Now, the problem is those results are challenged by other results. There was a survey in the UK in 2019, much greater number of people, and 80% of people said their lives are meaningless. What's going on? How can the scientific construct and like why because you get ambiguous results when your construct is not well structured. Part of what's going on is another problem, which is behind that meaning is my personal, private possession, my meaning. It's an assumption that was given to us by modernity, from the European Enlightenment and so on. There's the idea of we're an autonomous, monological self, in that we reason best when we are acting autonomously by our own and reasoning in our head, and cognition is like computation in our head. It's what Taylor, the great Canadian philosopher, calls the buffered self. But the self and its metacognition, being metacognitive, is important to your sense of self. We test animals, the mirror test, which is a metacognitive test. Are they aware of their own appearance? Are they aware of their own cognition? Are they aware of their own body? Right? Reason, metacognition, the self, are all dialogically developed. They're developed through dialogue with other people. So much work going on now, Sperber and Mercier and a ton, that reason is fundamentally dialogical in nature. And of course, meaning is too. And personhood is inherently communal. There are no persons without community. There are no communities without person, because being a person requires recognition and responsibility. So at the level of relevance realization, we don't want that autonomous buffered self. We want the extended agent, the extended self, the extended person. What's an extended, what do you mean by extended agency? Niche construction. Organisms shape their environment and the environment shapes them, and they're mutually fitting to each other. And you know what culture is? A way in which we connect to other people to speed and deepen that whole process. That's what culture is. You get resonance realization when we're resonating with our world or with other people. That's extended selfhood. There's a shared narrative that allows us to indwell and internalize. We get what Siegel calls mind-sight resonance. I see into Arjun, so I adjust myself so he can understand me and see better into me. And then because he sees better into me, he adjusts himself. And we start doing this, we resonate. And he's not a possession because there's a part of him that is always beyond my control. So we can get into one of the most powerful forms of flow between each other. We can get into this deep dialogue with each other. And you've been in there. You've been in those conversations that take on a life of their own and have their own story and narrative to them. And then you get extended personhood. This is reverence realization. Persons are responsible, listen to that word, to promises and permissions. No other organism is. You won't catch any animal making a promise to you. You do things that you don't want to do because you made promises. And one of the things you have to do as a person is keep your promises. Because if all of us stop keeping our promises, culture dies. And if culture dies, we're in deep trouble. And we also have to get permission from other people. Why? Because we seek to be recognized by other persons. If nobody recognizes you as a person, your personhood is in danger. That's why ostracizing or exiling people is so powerful. This was Hegel's great point. This is how he overturned Kant's notion of the autonomous self. How do we decide the use of words? Do we go to the word judge? Where does that normativity come from? I recognize when Arjun is using the words correctly, and I connect to him. And then he recognizes. We are always having to recognize each other as having the correct authority to participate in a conversation. That's right. We need an account of meaning in life that connects up to something that's going on at this personhood level. This is my friend Greg Enriquez's notion of the justification hypothesis. We are always justifying ourselves. No other creature has to justify itself. And I want you to slow down and think justification has a rational component to it. Knowledge is justified true belief. How many of you are taught that? Justified. Yeah, justification. It goes into morality. Was that behavior justified? Of course, it's connected to justice. But many of you have probably forgotten it's also religious. It goes back to Christianity, especially the Protestant Reformation. Justification by faith. We are justified. We are made into persons from God because of our faith, the way we commune and connect to the source of what is ultimately real. You understand, I'm not offering an argument here for God, but I'm trying to show you how the account of meaning we're building here allows us to understand why the Protestants in the Protestant Reformation spoke that way and died for it. Okay. We can't address selfhood and narrative, justification and worldview, the cultivation of wisdom with the current meaning in life construct. Can't do any of that. It actually thwarts us and disconnects us from those important projects. What this means, again, low existential resilience, which means people are vulnerable to despair. And let's do something here. Let's ask the scientists who proposed this definition of meaning in life. How do you address the question whether or not meaning in life is just an illusion? After all, it's just subjective and personal. You're just projecting it onto an objectively valueless world. William Desmond says this. If you accept that, if you accept the fact value dichotomy given to us by the Enlightenment, that there's subjective values and there's objective facts, where's meaning in there? Is it a subjective value that is just projected onto an objectively valueless world by an organism that is objectively valueless and causally insignificant? That's just nihilism. That's just the hermeneutics of suspicion. Appearances are all deceiving. But here's the issue. If meaning is real and it's a real relation and it's a really it's a real coordination of how our agency, our self, and our person connects individually and collectively to reality, then it does not clearly sort into fact or value. If it's about relevance, is relevance an objective fact? Is this objectively relevant? It doesn't make no sense. Is relevance just a subjective preference? No, you can be wrong. You thought she was angry, but she's afraid. You're judging the wrong things as relevant. It's neither objective nor subjective. It is, again, the real relation. It's an affordance. It is an adaptivity. It's real fittedness. And in that way, it's like reason. Is reason subjective or objective? Before you answer, think about how either one of those answers destroys you. It has to connect your agency and your subjectivity to reality in both ways. You, what's relevant constrains what you look at, but what you look at corrects what you judge relevant. So it's interesting that Metz gets very close to that. He takes a great deal of time, careful, by the way. And I have to thank Arjun. Arjun read through this very carefully. I had a much more superficial reading, so I'm really thankful and relied on his help. But he completely rejects any subjectivist notions of meaning, like we just did there. He rejects most of the what he calls objectivist accounts of meaning. And then he comes around to a version, but I think it's actually really close to transjectivity. And so let's do this a little bit. He criticizes Wolff because Wolff says that, well, meaning in life is when subjective attraction meets objective attractiveness, but there's no such thing as objective attractiveness. Oh no, oh no. Okay, so that's the threat of nihilism, right? And he says, well, no, the problem is that subjective attraction meeting objective attractiveness, it's really vague. It's really vague. One of the things we can do to respond to that is we can make use of Stephen Smith in this wonderful book, Appeal and Attitude, Prospects for Ultimate Meaning, and talk about, instead of attraction, talk about appeal. Things are appealing to us. Why does that matter? Appeal means to call. When I appeal to you, I'm calling to you. When things are appealing to us, we're just attracted to them. Do you see the difference? They are calling to us. They are promising some potential fittedness that is good for us and good to us in some way. And he replaces, I, he well, I, I don't think he knows about Wolf, so that's incorrect. But he says, let's talk about what he calls attitude. Attitude is your orientation, your stance. Are you correctly oriented such that you can connect to what is appealing to you in a right relationship? Notice how once you shift and try to get a little bit clearer about what's really going on, right? Do you really experience your moments of meaning as projections? When you turn the corner, is the sunlight, are you just projecting? Or is something calling you such that you stop and interrupt your day and you want to behold it and participate into it? And like the people that have a higher state of consciousness, you want to at least momentarily conform to it and realize it. Let it go deeply into you and you deeply into it. Why are you doing that if it's just an illusion? Well, it's not, because affordances and adaptivity are fittedness at the level of agency, selfhood, and person are constitutive of everything we do. See, relevance realization finds relevance realization intrinsically interesting. Why? Because if it doesn't take care of itself, it will go wrong. That's why you have insight. Insight is evidence that relevance realization is interested in relevance realization because it is seeking to correct relevance realization so it connects better to what's real and empowers you to take the right agency, be the right self, have the proper responsibilities as a person in that situation, to be wise. You are intrinsically interested in the causes and conditions of what makes meaning making, which I don't like as a term, I would rather call it meaning cultivation, what makes meaning cultivation possible. See, when things can call to us, they can demand from us. Flow requires situations that are demanding for us, demand that we push our skills to the limit and beyond. That's not the same thing as attraction. What we're talking about with religio is something that's fundamental to human existence at the level of agency, self, and person. This is exactly Metz's theory. He calls it a kind of objectivity. I don't think it really is, or objectivism, I should say, which is not a good name because it sounds like he's talking about Ayn Rand, and that's just disaster no matter what you do. So um, I think it's closer to being transjective, the betweenness, the metaxu, the connectedness, the religio, the fittedness, the affordance, the adaptivity. He proposes a fundamentality theory. And I've already said, well, yeah, once you correct with critique what's going on in Wolf and you bring in some Smith and you bring in the arguments here, you're getting to something that's fundamental to human existence at the level of agency, selfhood, and personhood. So here's his definition. He's going to refine it, but I'm not going to do the refined version because it would take too long. Here's his more succinct initial presentation. The later versions don't overturn it; they just expand on it. Okay, a human person. Notice the word, by the way. A human person's life is meaningful the more she employs her reason and in ways that positively orient rationality towards fundamental conditions. Notice that's not subjective, but it's not really objective because it's about fit. Fundamental conditions of human existence. That's very deeply aligned and convergent with what we're arguing. We're talking about the constraints and the causes of connectedness, religio. Both this way, agent and arena, self and story, person and community, and this way, between all of them, so that we are at peace while we are deeply connected. We're talking about wisdom that enhances our religio, our connectedness individually and collectively, and can take us towards potentially ultimate meaning, as Smith said, and Yaden's work points to. We're talking about something not just about our beliefs, we're talking about our skills and our perspectives and our character. Remember, I said I would get back to it? Now I am. We're talking about virtue because virtue involves all of those. We're talking about virtuosity, can't something that's inspirational and aspirational, affordant, that it is flowing for us, that's inducing maturation. We have virtue and virtuosity. We have wisdom. Said it in multiple different and converging ways. If I had to put it, if we had to put it, sorry, into a very succinct thing, what's wrong with the current psychological notion of meaning in life is that meaning cultivation is separate, isolated, unconnected from wisdom cultivation. But that current construct, our Western folk and academic construct of meaning in life, is the anomaly. It is not the cultural historical norm, nor does it address all of these philosophical and psychological arguments. That is the thorough critique of the current construct of meaning in life. So I'm now going to be silent for a minute and ask Arjun to comment to the degree that he has time to do.
First off, thank you for doing such a great overview of our work. I mean, obviously, in my opinion, you contributed the bulk of the work, and I was only there for a small part. But I think that the presentation here is essential to understanding and improving on the construct, right? In science, we rely on the construct for everything that we operationalize. And as we've said here, if the construct is so deeply flawed, then the experiments that follow will also be similarly flawed. I want to touch on subjectivity and objectivity a little bit further and how transjectivity, as you said, fits into that divide. We've talked about how subjectivity limits us and prevents us from interfacing with what's really real. Uh, in my own experience, as and also as I've heard from many other people, if we take this subjectivist approach, we become open to cosmic absurdity, which is a term that John uses. It's the idea that because we're physically smaller than most everything in the universe, such as stars or galaxies, that somehow we are insignificant. So when the cosmic scale bears down upon us, if we adopt a subjectivist approach, then we are so easily overwhelmed that we fall into nihilism, which is what happened to me and which is what happened to a lot of other people. So one would think that the solution is to adopt objectivity, but that's also flawed because it refuses to admit our subjective well-being plays a role in meaning in life, which is something we've discussed as well, which ultimately plays into the idea that we need to develop a new metaphysics for understanding our place in the world. And that's what transjectivity is. John, do you want to talk a little bit more about defining transjectivity, exactly what it is?
Yeah, I mean, and here I want to give credit also to somebody who has preceded me with astonishingly beautiful work. And I'm going to be recording some conversation with him, William Desmond, and his whole work. He does a book on the being in the between, ethics in the between, God in the between. He's trying to cover all the major categories. This is the metapsychological, the between. And it's exactly this idea that is also at the center of 4E cognitive science, that cognition is not in your head, but it is embodied, enacted, right, embedded, and extended. It's about how you are dynamically coupled at multiple levels to your environment in loops of different temporal and spatial depth. And this also lines up with predictive processing models. Some of you might realize it. Also, work like Michael Levin does with the idea of a cognitive light cone for talking about how intelligent an organism is. This is all about, right, the between, the connectedness, the transjectivity. So you've got great work in philosophy by Desmond. You got 4E cognitive science. And then, as we've tried to argue, if you actually go in and try to clear up these problems in meaning in life, you also get to transjectivity. Um, and many of you who have a philosophical education will probably be noting that I'm we are relying on arguments by Wittgenstein and Heidegger, who were also Heidegger's notion of aletheia, right? Wittgenstein's argument that there's no private language, right? That they were trying to break us out of this Cartesian framework in which there's the subjective and the objective, there's value and fact, there's is and there's ought, right? And all of these things are causing terrific uh, have caused just unendingly terrific problems in philosophy and science. Um, and so, in many different quarters, biology, for cognitive science, philosophy, both continental and analytic, there has been a sustained effort to try and break us out of that Cartesian prison. And we're extending that effort to the meaning in life construct.
Yeah, the subjective objective dichotomy isn't something that's just constrained to this specific topic that we're dealing with. Even in physics, for example,
Yes.
in quantum mechanics, the measurement problem, which some of you might have heard of, particularly describes how we don't have an idea of what measurement even is and what the observer is because we've for so long neglected the role of the observer in understanding how the system works. A similar principle is at play here. If you
Yeah.
don't understand the observer and how the observer is affecting the system, how the system affects the observer, then your explanation for the phenomenon will be incomplete.
Thank you. That's excellent. We could also point to other convergent work by Frank, Gleiser, and Thompson, The Blind Spot, and their critique about how one interpretation of the scientific worldview, a standard naturalism, has never included or made a proper place for the meaningful experience of scientists doing science in its ontology. So the one thing that doesn't fit into its ontology is the very thing it's relying on to generate its worldview. And so that's why they call it the blind spot. I strongly recommend that book because it canvases, like what Arjun did with physics, it canvases a lot of these kinds of issues in physics, in biology, in cognition. A little shout out, they talk about the central blind spot in cognition being the problem of relevance realization. Um, and so, yeah, this is right. This is a species of a larger genus that, and these and the species are not disconnected. They all are interwoven together. This is a larger nested network of problems, and we need to address it because I've been trying, I've alluded several times, meaning in life really matters to human lives in profound ways.
Precisely. It's not something that is just relegated to some ivory tower academic paper.
Yeah.
This is a movement that we're trying to build because it is addressing real problems that we see in our society right now. The problem of meaning is something that applies to the person you see around the block, the people you see on the street, your friends, your family, your neighbors. The problem of meaning is fundamental to being human. And if we don't adequately resolve this issue right now, it's just going to create further and further repercussions down the line. And at that point, it might be too late for us.
Yes. So Arjun is alluding to the our argument, which I'm not going to review here, from Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, that if you think that the argument that we're weaving here about the interpenetration, the interweaving of wisdom and meaning cultivation, our culture has entered into a meaning crisis, which could also be described as a wisdom famine. We don't know where to go to look for wisdom. The institutions uh, that used to be central to wisdom, like monasteries. How central is a monastery to your life? The role models we used to have, all of these have disappeared. There's a lot more, but that's the nature of the meaning crisis. And of course, that vacuum will not remain unfilled. We try to fill it with other things. And so we've got a lot of symptoms of the meaning crisis. I won't go into this, but you can take a look at that book. You can take a look at the video series. So our concern is we want to be able to address these issues around that people are facing around absurdity and loneliness, um, a general sense that the world is full of bullshit and disordered in ways that are toxic to human beings. More and more and more. I won't go on to the meaning crisis because if I start talking about it, I'll talk for 50 hours. But so not only is the issue of meaning in a larger network of problems, that network of problems is, as Arjun said, not ivory tower. It is a pervasive corrosion to our culture. Our culture, I want to be clear. It's not like we're the only culture that's ever had a meaning crisis. Meaning crises have arisen at different times at different places. Um, and part of what we do in the book is look at that historically. We always face the perennial problem of falling into despair or self-destruction or both, which is what suicide is, despair and the self-deceptive, self-destructive destruction. We always face that threat. The issue isn't that, that's perennial. The issue is in what way is your culture helping you to wisely cultivate a meaning that is shareable with others so that you can trust them, so that we can work together to commune in the ways that help deepen our agency, selfhood, and personhood.
I couldn't have put it better myself. And that's why you're the professor here.
Is
One
there,
more.
yeah, go
Yes.
ahead, please. Please. I know you're
Okay.
pressed for time, so I want you to
Mm.
take control of everything.
One more thing I want to talk about here is how the word meaning itself is deeply confounded. The jingle jangle problem, as John tells us in cognitive science. When we talk about meaning and meaning in life, especially, we're describing a very thick phenomenon, right? It's descriptive, it's evaluative, it's aspirational. But the term meaning itself can mean many things. You see, the way I just used even mean there,
Yeah.
right? In this case, when we talk about meaning in life, we're talking about it, I think, applied specifically to human beings. It's not something that can be applied to other categories of entities. Like, uh, I won't use this framework of meaning to to evaluate whether the American Revolution was meaningful. It's
Hmm.
not
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
same here. So our focus on meaning in life is very much on how humans should live, how humans should aspire, how they should be evaluated, how we should describe the meaning in their lives, and not so much regarding other areas of philosophical interest.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm totally agree in agreement, consonant with that. I think that's exactly right. Um, this is a pervasive problem. Jingle jangle. I can never remember which one it is. We'll have multiple names for the same phenomena, or we'll have the same name for multiple phenomena. This is not my idea, by the way. I taught it to Arjun, but it's not my idea. This is a pervasive criticism that is about a pervasive problem in psychology and the social sciences, the jingle jangle problem. We talked about it all the time. We talked about it, I think, in the paper that was in which Igor Grossman was the lead author on wisdom in a polarized world. So we are trying to get rid of that noise and the way people slip and slide around in that in a way that is actually very unhelpful.
And one more thing I want to talk about, it's the appeal to phenomenology in our arguments, and in most arguments regarding meaning in life. I think some people might think that we're appealing to phenomenology too much, that trying to appeal to how people feel and how they intuit the world is actually a disadvantage of our theory. But I think it's actually the opposite. Meaning in life is a phenomenological phenomenon. It is something that is so deeply connected to your existence in the world, to your conscious experience, to how you feel, to how you act, to how you behave, that it is impossible to disconnect this phenomenal perspective from any theory of meaning in life. What we should be trying to do, and what we're trying to do here as well, is connect that phenomenal perspective to propositions that we create and descriptions that we make so that we can explain not only the experiences that people have, but also generate predictions for how they might feel under different circumstances.
Yes, what I when I was giving the presentation and what we're trying to do is and this is of course something that was ultimately inspired in me by my good friend Evan Thompson. We're trying to link powerfully integrate the functionality and the phenomenology. Relevance realization, for example, is both a functional account of what you're doing, solving problems, etc., but it's also phenomenological. What is salient to you? How you're sizing up things? What's foregrounded and backgrounded? What you're paying attention to? What appeals to you? but it's also explaining how your intelligence is operating and functioning in the world, etc. So we part of our methodological orientation is to constantly bind together the phenomenology and the functionality so they are mutually informing each other and transforming each other in a way that is theoretically fruitful.
That's all I have to say on the matter so far. We'll continue to build on this argument, I think. We'll
Yep.
continue to look for more plausible convergence with other sources, as John said. And hopefully, we'll be able to put this in a paper sometime soon so that we have it formalized and so that we can put everything together in a more cohesive way.
That's the plan. And of course, we're going to iterate this again. We have both committed to a longer project, longer term, not only sort of finishing this and hopefully, a publication. We also want to do work on a positive theory in the sense of, okay, now tell us more about like um, the positive, like tell us more positively about how one goes about doing this, what to cultivate wisdom, cultivating meaning and wisdom together, and so forth. And so that, of course, is tricky. But you know, we've already made a lot of proposals that have started to lay the foundation for that positive response to the criticism. But we're going to also do that. We're both looking forward to it. I'm very interested um, and encouraged by the fact that there are many people like think of Smith's book, uh, appeal and attitude prospects for ultimate meaning. That's a really powerful subtitle because I'm really interested in the degree to which uh, people need a more ultimate kind of meaning when they fall into deeper versions of a meaning crisis and nihilism, loneliness, issues like that, and also sort of maladaptive displacement in which you try to recover through a kind of religious commitment to politics and polarization, and you try to make that the domain in which you're going to get this all satisfied, or you take up a relationship to a fictional universe MCU, and you're trying to get satisfied. Like again, I won't go into all the ways in which people have surrogacies for proper meaning in life, but a good theory of meaning in life should offer people alleviation to suffering and good alternatives to surrogates, especially maladaptive ones. So that's what we're going to also do in the more positive theory.
Yep. And I think with that, we're pretty much wrapped up here. I want to thank you again, John, for having me on. A great pleasure to be here. It's a great pleasure to work with you. And I look forward to our continuing partnership.
It's been a great pleasure having you on, and I appreciate your presence. Allowed me to share credit with you and also be encouraged by you. And I like the way you brought a personal dimension to it, especially the perspective of a young adult, people who are facing some of the most stringent challenges around meaning. So I want to thank you very much. I want to thank you for uh, your integrity and your genuineness. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. There is more to come.